Oh, thank you all again, and thank you all, guys, for coming to my lecture this early in the morning. It's 9 o'clock in Serbia, where I reside, and I guess it's not much later in the rest of Europe if you are chiming in from there. But that being said, it would be kind of impolite to start this talk without giving a short introduction about myself, telling you who am I, what's my professional experience and background. My name is Mladen, as Ulrich already said, and I'm currently a creative director at Magic Media Studios, and I teach narrative design at Faculty of Media Communication on Singerdunum University in Belgrade. I'm also a former director from Playrix and former head of narrative at Apex Entertainment. And in my past career, I've written around 30 some games. So I have some experience from everything, starting with free to play and casual games, up to everything for PC and console. That being said, our talk today is going to be a bit on a shorter side because Oleg told me to try to cram it into around 25 or something minutes to leave some space for your potential questions. But even if we kind of a trespass over a bit line, feel free to leave your questions in Q&A, and I'll make sure to answer every single one of them. Anyhow, what we are going to be talking about today. Well, we're going to be talking about how stories are told within video games ecosystem. We are going to explore a bit how different approaches to telling narrative can be utilized in order to make your game a better experience, a more efficient experience in translating your story to the player. In order to do that, we'll talk a bit about where stories come from, how they're shaped, and what we can do to avoid just overdoing one thing or another. In order to start with this, well, I would like to go a bit in the history and to realize when we started to do these things, like to approach storytelling from non-verbal side or verbal side. And it's a thing that's not something of a new age. It's not a new invention. It predates myself or yourself. It predates games as media. It predates movies as media. It predates even Shakespeare. It predates Homer. So it's really, really, really old. Now, since we don't have much written stuff from that period, let me try to do a little reenactment here. And let's together imagine two gentlemanly cavemen standing in front of a posh cave. Let's give them some names. Let's call them Ugg Ugg and Nook Nook. And Ugg Ugg tells to Nook Nook, Nook Nook, my man, we were bison hunting yesterday and it was amazing. We killed a couple of dozens of these and it was the best hunt I was ever in. And Nook Nook is amazed and says, oh, Ugg Ugg, tell me more about it. And Ugg Ugg says, okay, let's sit down by the fire and I will tell you everything. And then he proceeds to spend a couple of hours telling him the story, explaining him every facet of that amazing hunt. In a parallel universe, the same guys, Ugg Ugg and Nook Nook, are standing in front of the same cave, but Ugg Ugg says to Nook Nook, come on, let me show you something, and leads him into a cave, leads him to a cave wall, and shows him the first cave painting. There is a couple of dozens of bison on that wall, and there is a couple of stickmen hunting these bisons. It's the same story. It's the same people, but the same message is translated two ways. Now, all jokes aside and caveman stories aside, this is what we do as species. We find something that we are adept at and use that to tell our stories. And again, it's not new. We did it across our history, from ancient Greece and Rome with mosaics, with pottery paintings. We told the same stories over and over and over again, just using different approach to it. Now, where do all these ideas come from? How do we shape them? How important is it to realize how to utilize these different approaches to craft the best storyline out of the idea? Well, it starts something like this. Let's get back to today, to this time and space. And This happens to me a lot, and if you are in games, I'm absolutely sure that you are familiar with this situation. That somebody who you just met, who realizes that you work in gaming, is interested to share a story with you, to give you an idea about a game, to help you craft one based on his thoughts. And when you start prodding at that idea, when you start pushing, when you start asking questions, it ends up being an amorphous blob of everything. It's not a polished idea. There is a ton of emotions, some notions of quest lines, maybe even idea of the ending, some characters, but it's a convoluted mess. Now, is that an issue? Is that because the person who is coming to you, a newbie, they don't know how to write a good story, so they're just throwing it everything at you? No, in all honesty, that's where all ideas start. It's a gut feel. It's that enormous blob of everything inside every one of us. So what we do with that is try to give it some shape. Now, in order to explain how we approach that, I will again use history to be my helper here and try to do a heavy paraphrasing of Michelangelo. Once that he was asked how he crafted one of his magnificent sculptures, he responded, I saw an angel in the block of marble, and what I did was to set him free. Other sources claim he said, I saw an angel in the marble, and I just removed everything that wasn't him. Now, whatever might be the true case, whatever he really said, it ends up being pretty much the same. Once that you have this enormous blob of material you're working with, it's important to start to realize what you have to trim, what you have to remove, how to get to that core of the idea. And non-verbal approach to narrative is a big help in that, especially when it comes to video games. Now, sorry, I messed up the slide. Okay, it heavily depends how we approach the shaping of these ideas on where we are coming from. What's our personal history? I myself, I'm coming over from literature. I was a traditional writer before entering the gaming industry. And for people who are used to write books or novels, it's a completely vastly different world. We have every white page in the world at our disposal. Do we want to be boring and describe something in the style of Russian classics for 30 or 50 pages for one simple thing within a game? Within a book? Of course. If our time allows it, if our creative vision asks for it, and of course, if editor allows it, we can do it. We are free to do it. It's a fair game. In games, you cannot do that. In cinematography, on the other hand, you are never pushed as a consumer to take part in that experience. You're there to experience what director, what screenwriter had in mind, and you do that in an hour and a half or 2 hours of your time. Imagine if you were in a cinema and, I don't know, Quentin Tarantino enters in the middle of the movie and says to you, sure, you can watch the third act of my movie, but first you have to do a 10 minutes headstand. Unless you do it, I'm sorry, you have to leave the cinema. It's what happens in the game. When you're playing games, you have to take part in that experience. And what's worse is that you have to be good enough or apt enough in it in order to pass the obstacles that a game is putting in front of you. Now, players of Dark Souls series amongst you absolutely know what I'm talking about, but it can be Mario as well. You have to complete the level to discover what happens next. Unless you do that, well, you're bad. You'll have to go on internet and Google what happens next. Now, for comic books, they're heavily curated. You have this frame, and what's shown in the frame is what you get. You, the consumer, cannot explore it. You are confined to this piece of paper, to this frame, to this artistic vision, and to this amount of written text that showcases just what artists wanted you to see. You cannot be explorative. In games, people are explorative. And what makes them different, they're not only explorative, they're interactive, which is also good and the bad. Good because you share the guilt with the player. they are guilty for the outcome because they've chosen wrong or did wrong or jumped wrong or did something wrong, or they're just not good enough at playing the game. But in the same time, it is bad because you cannot curate that experience the way you can curate the experience of other traditional writing forms. Because sometimes games take up to 40 or 60 hours to complete, and you don't know if the person who's playing the game started playing it, I don't know, 20 days ago or 2 days ago, and how much time has passed between two of these playing sessions, how much of narrative they remember from the previous playthrough, and stuff like that. So you have to remind them, you have to do stuff to be sometimes even a little boring in order to make sure that people realize your story and that they know where you are leading them. And after all, what's specific for games, really? I mean, who amongst you or us has never pressed space to speak boring dialogue? That's what happens. And you have, as a designer, to think about it, to plan for it, to still make the story understandable, even if people do that. The second biggest difference when shaping these ideas for different media is sheer narrative density. Now, pardon me, I wasn't the one doing this number crunching, so if something is off, blame the person who did it. But if you're reading a book, you can get up to 250 words per minute. It's an immense amount of story being told in just a minute. In TV shows, in movies, you can get up to 125 words per minute. And for games, somebody did the analysis for narratively driven games like Witcher 3, like Final Fantasy, and they added up with an average of 16 words per minute. Now, that's not a lot. In fact, it's a small amount of storyline that you can tell within 16 words. So what you're doing for the remainder of the time that you spend in the game, well, you're experiencing the game. You're playing the core gameplay of what you are experiencing. So that is first reason why in games, non-verbal storytelling is somewhat of a crucial thing. You have to define all these elements of context that surrounds the player when they are not talking in order to tell your story well. And that means that narrative isn't just the text. Narrative is so much more. Now, since I come from the literature, as I said, and since I'm a narrative designer, of course, I will start with verbal storytelling, or that means going back to text and talking about some ground rules that we should set in order not to get to a place where we are convoluted, when we are just throwing walls of text at the player or doing exposition dumps, which make the experience a bit more confusing than it should be. Now, what is verbal storytelling for those of you who are not kind of not have the past experience in narrative design or any other sort of screenwriting? Well, verbal storytelling is basically everything that you use to throw your written words at the player. It can be dialogue, it can be item description, it can be chunk of lore, but it can also be a menu, a throwaway line on the map, the name of the character, the name of the location, everything that conveys text is your verbal storytelling. It is you, the writer, conveying your words directly to the player. Now, to do that efficiently, as I said, there are some pretty easy ground rules that we should follow. The first, and I believe the most crucial one, is always start with systems. And what are systems? Systems are basically the vessels you use as narrative designer, the features within the gameplay that you use to showcase the narrative. Now, to explain this, let me give you a little example. I could ask every single one of you to explain me how their day was yesterday in an essay of 3,000 words. And it would be a task. It would take some time to complete, but everybody should be able to do it. But after that, I can ask you to describe me how was your day yesterday, and do it in one comic bubble that is not longer than 12 words, or I don't know, 60 characters. And that would be equally daunting task. But if you start writing your game with the first one in mind, that you have ability to write as much as you want, and you end up with a game that squeezes you in small and short snippets of text to showcase that narrative to the player, you're in deep trouble. So first, hug your game designer, hug your systems designer, talk with them, and try to realize for your genre, for your type of game, what kind of narrative vessels, what kind of systems you can use to showcase that story to the world. It's crucial because it will dictate your tempo of storytelling. It will dictate what can you do. And after all, how big of a story you can tell within this type of mechanics. Secondary, when you're dealing with dialogue, when you're writing stuff for your characters to say, always pay attention. Does it serve any of the core functions of dialogue within a game? Does it tell you something about the character who's speaking? Does it tell you something about other characters that surround him? Does it tell you something about the world building or lore? And finally, does it push the storyline forward? If any of these four is true, then it is a dialogue line that you should consider keeping in. But if it is anything besides that, rethink it and perhaps remove that line. It might be too much. Then, when you are dealing with lore, everybody wants to be Tolkien. And I know Silmarillion is great, unfinished works are great, but that's not what we do in games. We leave breadcrumbs. Take a look at the Elden Ring. The magnificence of these new games is in this, that they give you something to play with. They give you some brain food. They give you snippets here and there, and they make you connect them into a coherent storyline within your head. Don't underestimate your players. They can do it. And don't spoon feed them stuff. Give them enough information to be entertained. Give them the information that is crucial and fun, but not overdo it. And the same goes for exposition. If you are forced to use exposition, make sure first that it is really necessary. And if you do it, keep it light. Don't use exposition to dump crucial information on players. And if you're thinking about doing it, please remember the line from the latest Star Wars, somehow Palpatine returned. It can get that bad. Now, we are going to Robin of this Batman. We are going to nonverbal storytelling and going through the same things. I'm going to try to explain how we can utilize some stuff to help us shorten and lessen the amount of texts that we are throwing at our players. Now, what's nonverbal storytelling? I'm not going to resort to caveman jokes this time. But nonverbal storytelling is, as I mentioned previously, it's everything that you do to define the context of the gameplay without relying on words. This is your, as I quoted here, your Mr. Bean or Mike Myers, just being funny or scary. Just let's get back to Mike Myers, for example. He can get extremely scary without ever relying on words. The sheer posture, the look of that character, the way he moves, the soundtrack that follows him is something that makes your bones chill. And if he would use words while he was following his victims, it would be, in fact, less scary than it is as is. So nonverbal storytelling is your Mike Myers. It's your contextual elements. It's your visuals. It's your music. It's everything else. All the reminder of gameplay experience that is not put in words. And yes, sometimes people talk about games and they tend to say, oh man, this game has a wonderful atmosphere. And if you did that, you in fact admired nonverbal storytelling techniques, because everything has to be in line in order to tell the same story. Game production is not a disjointed thing, something where writer is writing, designer is designing, artist is doing his work, and everybody does that by themselves. It's a coherent thing. It's a storytelling technique where everybody chimes in to tell that story. You, as a narrative designer, you're just one cog in that mechanism. And to do that well, to create that wonderful atmosphere, you have to remember some things. It always starts with gameplay. What does it mean? Well, if you want to make an exciting game, make exciting gameplay, not only exciting words. If you want your game to be adventurous, design your core features to be adventurous, to cater to that feeling. If you want it to be funny, do that. So make sure that your gameplay is following the core idea, what the game should be. Let it be in the same vein of the story that you're trying to tell. When it comes to visuals, of course, it's easy. Sheer design of character can tell you million of words. You don't have to talk about, I don't know, Fallout character having a hard life if you see them design, or you don't have to explain what happened in some place if you design the place to look shattered, to look destroyed, with reminders of dead people around you. It's pretty clear what happened. So try to show as much as you can without relying on words. Audio, again, when you hear the first act of Beethoven's symphony, like dun 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 dun, it conveys tension. You don't have to write tension in order to get it. When you hear the opening chords of Star Wars theme, you know that you're up for a ride. You can do the same in games. But perhaps we can talk about something else, go back, as I say here, for Halloween and that iconic score, or maybe talk about games like Senua's Sacrifice, where audio is a core part of experience. It is the game that pushes you in this situation of being this bewildered Nordic woman that travels across the world. And what happens is you hear the voices that are pointing you to do stuff, not to do stuff. You hear stuff that is creeping you out at all times, making this game creepy, also combining verbal narrative, because yeah, those voices use words, but the way it is used, the way it is conveyed, the spatial audio it uses is wonderful, and or terrifying, and it really conveys the message of a game well. Same goes for animation. Uh, I know it's not a game, I know it's not the animation, but a simple movement can tell you a story. Like lately, I guess that most of you has watched Ashoka series, Ashoka Star Wars series, and everybody was smitten with Bylan Skull character. And since his first fight, everybody was talking that he is using his lightsaber like a medieval sword, and that he's more of a knightly type, and they were speculating based on that. What his past, who is his master, like a ton of stuff, a ton of speculation, a ton of parallel narratives created by consumers of the show, stemmed just out of his fighting style. You can do that with animation. If somebody is strong and powerful, you don't have to tell it, show it within the animation. Now, we kind of covered the basic ground of both. The question is what we can do to make a choice. How do we choose which type of narrative to utilize? And it's by following some simple steps, or at least some guidelines, call it what you will. First, make sure that before you delve deep into creating the world, into writing dialogues, into creating characters, to understand the game you're creating, understand the genre, understand the way it is written, understand, most importantly, the amount of text and contextual elements you can fit in, and understand how big of a story you can tell within this medium, with this genre. Then when you start planning the story, don't overdo it. Don't write fully fledged story right away. Try to keep it at level of this blob that we talked about, on the level of this high level idea that includes a ton of stuff and vague feelings, gut feel of a game, before you start designing the rest. Meaning, then you design systems that could translate your idea, design the systems that go along with your genre, that go well with your intended storyline, and then proceed to shape your storyline in the way that it can be told within these systems, within this genre. Then, in order to get some help with non-verbal storytelling, make sure that you share the vision. Talk to everybody, talk to artists, ask them if they're able to do something, if they are able to showcase something, talk about the world that you have in your mind. Try to let everybody in, because they will return you a ton of stuff. They will give you the option to show so many things in the world that you don't even realize, because artists will always have a better vision of what they can do with their craft than you as a screenwriter have. And the last one is the most important, I guess. Try everything else before writing text. Check all the boxes. Check everything that we talked before, and try to do it before relying on sheer text. Because as cinema had this rule of show, don't tell, maybe the games should have a new rule of their own. Play, don't tell, play, don't show, or something like that. Because what we should be aiming for is letting players experience the story that we have in our mind, not just to tell them the story. And what then? Well, once that you jump over all these obstacles, it's writing, removing, and doing it all over again. Iterations and circles. You start over, you remove until you get to that angel which is trapped in the marble. And that's it for today. I think that we didn't cross over the line that Oleg proposed. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them in QA part of mine, or send them to my mail.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Vladan. We have many questions. Let's go. Which games do you feel are among the best examples in terms of verbal, non-verbal storytelling? Which 3 games would be best to study, learn more about gamified storytelling?
Oh, well, where do I begin? I can talk a bit about my favorite stories, perhaps, in video games. My absolute favorites, of course, because I'm coming from literature, are Knights of the Old Republic, the old ones, the first one especially. Then Disco Elysium is a wonderful storyline, and perhaps Planescape Torment. Those are wonderful verbal storytelling games, but also including some amazing non-verbal storytelling techniques. Now, on speaking about non-verbal storytelling, you should take a look at Lost. It's an amazing game which just puts you in such a intense world that it doesn't have to use words. It doesn't have to put text in your face. It's just amazing. What was the second question about gamified narrative? Oleg? Okay, I opened QA. Sorry. Now, 3 games to study about gamified storytelling. Well, I would say pick one which is heavy on verbal storytelling. For example, one that I given, Disco Elysium, would be wonderful. Then try to take a look at something which is extremely visual, as Lost, and perhaps try something which is not just narrative driven, but it is narrative driven, in fact, something like Firewatch, for example. Now, when we are talking about creating a story for Samuel, what should come first, verbal storytelling and non-verbal storytelling? Well, verbal storytelling always predates the non-verbal storytelling. It doesn't mean that you have to do it all, but at least putting to paper some notion of ideas, some basic structure of it, some basic ideas of contextual elements, of world building, of the atmosphere. These are some crucial things in order to get your non-verbal storytelling right. Now, for Mattis, the question about audio in video games, I think I mentioned Senua's Sacrifice. It's an amazing game. You can check, I guess, every Star Wars game is also a good check. But perhaps a weird favorite of mine should be Mario, because it really conveys well in audio what's happening on the screen. Then for
Mladen,
tutorials,
Mladen,
oh,
unfortunately, we will have to wrap up. We're running out of time. Like, fantastic to have you here. If you could stay, please, here on the backstage and answer the questions
absolutely,
as discussed some
absolutely.
time. Thank you so
Thank you,
much.
Oleg, and thank you, guys. Cheers.